Good evening, and welcome back to Bedtime Stories with Peachy. Tonight we will be continuing Grimm's Complete Fairytales. Last time, if you recall, we read Let me remember how to speak English. We read The Frog Prince and The Gallant Tailor. And this time, we are going to start The Giant and the Tailor. Maybe the same tailor. I also got a bookmark this time. I came prepared. And if you've noticed, we moved onto the couch instead, so it's more comfy. Got my blanket and everything. All right. The Giant and the Tailor. A certain tailor who was great at boasting but poor at doing took it into his head to go abroad for a while and look about the world. As soon as he could manage it, he left his workshop and wandered on his way over hill and dale, sometimes hither, sometimes thither, but ever on and on. Once, when he was out, he perceived in the blue distance a steep hill, and behind it a tower reaching to the clouds, which rose up out of a wild, dark forest. "Thunder and lightning!" cried the tailor. "What is that?" And as he was strongly goaded by curiosity, he went boldly towards it. But what made the tailor open his eyes and mouth when he came near it was to see that the tower had legs, and leapt in one bound over the steep hill, and was now standing as an all-powerful giant before him.
"What do you want here, you little fly's leg?"
cried the giant, with a voice as if it were thundering on every side. The tailor whimpered, "I just want to look about and see if I can earn a bit of bread for myself in this forest."
"If that is what you are after," said the giant, "you may have a place with me."
"If it must be, why not? What wages shall I receive?"
"You shall hear what wages you shall have. Every year 365 days, and when it is leap year, one more into the bargain. Does that suit you?"
"All right," replied the tailor, and thought in his own mind, "A man must cut his coat according to his cloth. I will try to get away as fast as I can." On this the giant said to him,
"Go, little ragamuffin, and fetch me a jug of water."
"Had I not better bring the well itself at once, and the spring too?" asked the boaster, and went with the pitcher to the water.
"What? The well and the spring too?"
growled the giant in his beard, for he was rather clownish and stupid, and began to be afraid.
"That knave is not a fool. He has a wizard in his body. Be on your guard, old Hans. This is no serving man for you."
When the tailor had brought the water, the giant bade him go into the forest and cut a couple of blocks of wood and bring them back. "Why not the whole forest at once, with one stroke? The whole forest, young and old, with all that is there, both rough and smooth?" asked the little tailor, and went to cut the wood.
"What? The whole forest, young and old, with all that is there, both rough and smooth, and the well and its spring too?"
growled the credulous giant in his beard, and was still more terrified.
"The knave can do much more than bake apples, and has a wizard in his body. Be on your guard, old Hans. This is no serving man for you."
When the tailor had brought the wood, the giant commanded him to shoot 2 or 3 wild boars for supper. "Why not rather 1,000 at one shot, and bring them all here?" inquired the ostentatious tailor.
"What?"
cried the timid giant in great terror.
"Let well alone tonight, and lie down to rest."
The giant was so terribly alarmed that he could not close an eye all night long for thinking what would be the best way to get rid of this accursed sorcerer of a servant. Time brings counsel. Next morning the giant and the tailor went to a marsh, round which stood a number of willow trees. Then said the giant,
"Hark you, Tailor, seat yourself on one of the willow branches. I long of all things to see if you are big enough to bend it down."
All at once the tailor was sitting on it, holding his breath and making himself so heavy that the bough bent down. When, however, he was compelled to draw breath, it hurried him, for unfortunately he had not put his goose in his pocket, so high into the air that he never was seen again, and this to the great delight of the giant. If the tailor has not fallen down again, he must still be hovering about in the air. And next story is The Little Farmer. There was a certain village where lived many rich farmers and only one poor one, whom they called the Little Farmer. He had not even a cow, and still less had he money to buy one, and he and his wife greatly wished for such a thing. One day he said to her,
"Listen, I have a good idea. It is that your godfather, the joiner, shall make us a calf of wood and paint it brown, so as to look just like any other, and then in time perhaps it will grow big and become a cow."
This notion pleased the wife, and Godfather Joiner set to work to saw and plane, and soon turned out a calf complete, with its head down and neck stretched out as if it were grazing. The next morning, as the cows were driven to pasture, the little farmer called out to the drover,
"Look here, I have got a little calf to go, but it is still young and must be carried."
"All right," said the drover, and tucked it under his arm, carried it into the meadows, and stood it in the grass. So the calf stayed where it was put, and seemed to be eating all the time. And the drover thought to himself,
"It will soon be able to run alone if it grazes at that rate."
In the evening, when the herds had to be driven home, he said to the calf,
"If you can stand there eating like that, you can just walk off on your own 4 legs. I am not going to lug you under my arm again."
But the little farmer was standing by his house door and waiting for his calf, and when he saw the cow herd coming through the village without it, he asked what it meant. The cow herd answered,
"It is still out there eating away, and never attended to the call, and would not come with the rest."
Then the little farmer said,
"I will tell you what, I must have my beast brought home."
And they went together through the fields in quest of it, but someone had stolen it, and it was gone. And the drover said,
"Most likely it has run away."
But the little farmer said, "Not it," and brought the cow herd before the bailiff, who ordered him, for his carelessness, to give the little farmer a cow for the missing calf. So now the little farmer and his wife possessed their long-wished-for cow. They rejoiced with all their hearts, but unfortunately they had no fodder for it and could give it nothing to eat, so that before long they had to kill it. Its flesh they salted down, and the little farmer went to the town to sell the skin and buy a new calf with what he got for it. On the way he came to a mill where a raven was sitting with broken wings, and he took it up out of pity and wrapped it in the skin. The weather was very stormy, and it blew and rained, so he turned into the mill and asked for shelter. The miller's wife was alone in the house, and she said to the little farmer, "Well, come in and lie down in the straw." And she gave him a piece of bread and cheese. So the little farmer ate, and then lay down with his skin near him, and the miller's wife thought he was sleeping with fatigue. After a while in came another man, and the miller's wife received him very well, saying, "My husband is out, we will make good cheer." The little farmer listened to what they said, and when he heard good cheer spoken of, he grew angry to think he had been put off with bread and cheese. For the miller's wife presently brought out roast meat, salad, cakes, and wine. Now as the pair were sitting down to their feast, there came a knock at the door. "Oh dear," cried the woman, "it is my husband." In a twinkling she popped the roast meat into the oven, the wine under a pillow, the salad in the bed, the cakes under the bed, and the man in the linen closet. Then she opened the door to her husband, saying, "Thank goodness you are here. What weather it is, as if the world were coming to an end." When the miller saw the little farmer lying in the straw, he said,
"What fellow have you got there?"
"Oh," said the wife, "the poor chap came in the midst of the wind and rain and asked for shelter, and I gave him some bread and cheese and spread some straw for him." The husband answered,
"Oh, well, I have no objection. Only get me something to eat at once."
But the wife said, "There is nothing but bread and cheese."
"Anything will do for me," answered the miller. "Bread and cheese forever."
And catching sight of the little farmer, he cried,
"Come along and keep me company."
The little farmer did not wait to be asked twice, but sat down and ate. After a while, the miller noticed the skin lying on the ground with the raven wrapped up in it, and he said,
"What have you got there?"
The little farmer answered, "A fortune teller." And the miller asked,
"Can he tell my fortune?"
"Why not?" answered the little farmer. "He will tell 4 things, and the 5th he keeps to himself." Now the miller became very curious, and said,
"Ask him to say something."
And the little farmer pinched the raven so that it croaked, "Grr, grr."
"What does he say?" asked the miller.
And the little farmer answered, "First, he says that there is wine under the pillow."
"That would be jolly,"
cried the miller, and he went to look and found the wine, and then asked,
"What next?"
So the little farmer made the raven croak again, and then said, "He says, secondly, that there is roast meat in the oven."
"That would be jolly,"
cried the miller, and he went and looked and found the roast meat. The little farmer made the fortune teller speak again, and then said, "He says, thirdly, that there is salad in the bed."
"That would be jolly,"
cried the miller, and went and looked and found the salad. Once more the little farmer pinched the raven so that he croaked and said,
"He says, fourthly and lastly, that there are cakes under the bed." "That would be jolly,"
cried the miller, and he went and looked and found the cakes. And now the two sat down to table, and the miller's wife felt very uncomfortable, and she went to bed and took all the keys with her. The miller was eager to know what the 5th thing could be, but the little farmer said, "Suppose we eat the 4 things in peace first, for the 5th thing is a great deal worse." So they sat and ate, and while they ate, they bargained together as to how much the miller would give for knowing the 5th thing, and at last they agreed upon $300. Wow! Then the little farmer pinched the raven so that he croaked aloud, and the miller asked what he said, and the little farmer answered, "He says that there is a demon in the linen closet."
"Then," said the miller, "that demon must come out of the linen closet."
And he unbarred the house door while the little farmer got the key of the linen closet from the miller's wife and opened it. Then the man rushed forth and out of the house, and the miller said,
"I saw the black rogue with my own eyes, so that is a good riddance."
And the little farmer took himself off by daybreak next morning with $300. And after this the little farmer by degrees got on in the world, and built himself a good house, and the other farmers said, "Surely the little farmer has been where it rains gold pieces, as it has brought home money by the bushel." And he was summoned before the bailiff to say whence his riches came, and all he said was,
"I sold my calf's skin for $300.
When the other farmers heard this, they wished to share such good luck, and ran home, killed all their cows, skinned them in order to sell them also for the same high price as the little farmer, and the bailiff said,
"I must be beforehand with them."
So he sent his servant into the town to the skin buyer, and he only gave her $3 for the skin. And that was faring better than the others, for when they came they did not get as much as that, for the skin buyer said, "What am I to do with all these skins?" Now the other farmers were very angry with the little farmer, for misleading them, and they vowed vengeance against him and went to complain of his deceit to the bailiff. The poor little farmer was with one voice sentenced to death and to be put into a cask with holes in it and rolled into the water. So he was led to execution, and a priest was fetched to say a mass for him, and the rest of the people had to stand at a distance. As soon as the little farmer caught sight of the priest, he knew him for the man who was hid in the linen closet at the miller's. And he said to him,
"As I let you out of the cupboard, you must let me out of the cask."
At that moment a shepherd passed with a flock of sheep, and the little farmer, knowing him to have a great wish to become bailiff himself, called out with all his might. Shepherd passed. Wait, bailiff himself called out with all his might. The little farmer called out with all his might,
"No, I will not, and if all the world asked me, I would not."
The shepherd, hearing him, came up and asked what it was he would not do. The little farmer answered,
"They want to make me bailiff if I sit in this cask, but I will not do it."
The shepherd said,
"If that is all there is to do in order to become bailiff, I will sit in the cask and welcome."
And the little farmer answered,
"Yes, that is all. Just you get into the cask, and you will become bailiff."
So the shepherd agreed and got in, and the little farmer fastened on the top. Then he collected the herd of sheep and drove them away. The priest went back to the parish assembly and told them the mass had been said. Then they came and began to roll the cask into the water, and as it went, the shepherd inside called out,
"I consent to be bailiff."
They thought that it was the little farmer who spoke, and they answered, "All right, but first you must go down below and look about you a little." And they rolled the cask into the water. Upon that the farmers went home, and when they reached the village, there they met the little farmer driving a flock of sheep and looking quite calm and contented. The farmers were astonished and cried, "Little farmer, whence come you? How did you get out of the water?"
"Oh, easily," answered he. "I sank and sank until I came to the bottom. Then I broke through the cask and came out of it, and there were beautiful meadows and plenty of sheep feeding, so I brought away this flock with me."
Then said the farmers, "Are there any left?"
"Oh, yes," answered the little farmer, "more than you can possibly need."
Then the farmers agreed that they would go and fetch some sheep also, each man a flock for himself, and the bailiff said, "Me first." And they all went together, and in the blue sky there were little fleecy clouds like lambskins, and they were reflected in the water, and the farmers cried out, "There are sheep down there at the bottom." When the bailiff heard that, he pressed forward and said, "I will go first and look about me, and if things look well, I will call to you." And he jumped plump into the water, and they all thought that the noise he made meant, "Come," so the whole company jumped in one after the other. So perished all the proprietors of the village, and the little farmer, as sole heir, became a rich man. That was interesting. All right, let's read maybe one more. Yeah, that sounds good. The next story is The Golden Key. In the winter time, when deep snow lay on the ground, a poor boy was forced to go out on a sledge to fetch wood. When he had gathered it together and packed it, he wished, as he was so frozen with cold, not to go home at once, but to light a fire and warm himself a little. So he scraped away the snow, and as he was thus clearing the ground, he found a tiny gold key. Hereupon he thought that where the key was, the lock must be also, and dug in the ground and found an iron chest. "If the key does but fit," thought he, "no doubt there are precious things in that little box." He searched, but no keyhole was there. At last he discovered one, but so small that it was hardly visible. He tried it, and the key fitted it exactly. Then he turned it once round, and now we must wait until he has quite unlocked it and opened the lid, and then we shall learn what wonderful things were lying in that box.
What? Hold up. What?
So he turned it once round, and now we must wait until he has fully unlocked it to learn what's inside. I feel like this story pranked me. These ones are short, so we'll keep going. Sharing joy and sorrow. Oh my god, it's another Tailor. Oh. Okay. There once was a tailor who was a quarrelsome fellow, and his wife, who was good, industrious, and pious, never could please him. Whatever she did, he was not satisfied, but grumbled and scolded, and knocked her about and beat her. Rude. As the authorities at last heard of it, they had him summoned and put in prison in order to make him better. He was kept for a while on bread and water, and then set free again. He was forced, however, to promise not to beat his wife any more, but to live with her in peace, and share joy and sorrow with her, as married people ought to do. All went on well for a time, but then he fell into his old ways, and was surly and quarrelsome. And because he dared not beat her, he would seize her by the hair and tear it out. The woman escaped from him and sprang out into the yard, but he ran after her with his yard measure and scissors and chased her about, and threw the yard measure and scissors at her and whatever else came in his way. When he hit her, he laughed, and when he missed her, he stormed and swore. This went on so long that the neighbors came to the wife's assistance. The tailor was again summoned before the magistrates and reminded of his promise.
Dear gentlemen, said he, I have kept my word. I have not beaten her, but have shared joy and sorrow with her.
How can that be, said the judge, when she continually brings such heavy complaints against you?
I have not beaten her, but just because she looked so strange, I wanted to comb her hair with my hand. She, however, got away from me and left me quite spitefully. Then I hurried after her, and in order to bring her back to her duty, I threw at her as a well-meant admonition whatever came readily to hand. I have shared joy and sorrow with her also, for whenever I hit her, I was full of joy. Oh my God. And she of sorrow, and if I missed her, then she was joyful, and I sorry. The judges were not satisfied with this answer, but gave him the reward he deserved. I hope the reward was to be put in jail and sentenced to execution. All right, the next story is called The Nail. A merchant had done good business at the fair. He had sold his wares and lined his money bags with gold and silver. Then he wanted to travel homewards and be in his own house before nightfall. So he packed his trunk with the money on his horse and rode away. At noon he rested in a town, and when he wanted to go farther, the stable boy brought out his horse and said, "A nail is wanting, sir, in the shoe of its left hind foot." Let it be wanting, answered the merchant. The shoe will certainly stay on for 6 miles I have still to go. I am in a hurry.
In the afternoon, when he once more alighted and had his horse fed, the stable boy went into the room to him and said, "Sir, a shoe is missing from your horse's left hind foot. Shall I take him to the blacksmith?"
Let it still be wanting, answered the man. The horse can very well hold out for the couple of miles which remain. I am in haste.
He rode forth, but before long the horse began to limp. It had not limped long before it began to stumble, and it had not stumbled long before it fell down and broke its leg. The merchant was forced to leave the horse where it was and unbuckle the trunk, take it on his back, and go home on foot. And there he did not arrive until quite late at night.
And that unlucky nail, said he to himself, has caused all this disaster.
Make haste slowly is the lesson of this story. Let's see. This video might be a little longer, but we might as well read one more. This is called Tom Thumb. There was once a poor countryman who used to sit in the chimney corner all evening and poke the fire while his wife sat at her spinning wheel. And he used to say,
"How dull it is without any children about us. Our house is so quiet, and other people's houses so noisy and merry."
"Yes," answered his wife and sighed. "If we could only have one, and that one ever so little, no bigger than my thumb, how happy I should be. It would indeed be having our heart's desire." Now it happened that after a while the woman had a child who was perfect in all his limbs, but no bigger than a thumb. Oh. Then the parents said, "He is just what we wished for, and we love him very much." And they named him according to his stature, Tom Thumb. And though they gave him plenty of nourishment, he grew no bigger, but remained exactly the same size as when he was first born. And he had very good faculties, and was very quick and prudent, so that all he did prospered. One day his father made ready to go into the forest to cut wood, and he said, as if to himself,
"Now, I wish there was someone to bring the cart to me."
"Oh, father," cried Tom Thumb, "if I can bring the cart, let me alone for that, and in proper time, too."
Then the father laughed and said, "How will you manage that? You are much too little to hold the reins."
"That has nothing to do with it, father. While my mother goes on with her spinning, I will sit in the horse's ear and tell him where to go."
"Well," answered the father, "we will try it for once."
When it was time to set off, the mother went on spinning after setting Tom Thumb in the horse's ear, and so he drove off, crying, "Gee-up, gee-woo." Gee-wo? I've never seen that word before. So the horse went on quite as if his master were driving him, and drew the wagon along the right road to the wood. Now it happened just as they turned a corner, and the little fellow was calling out, "Gee-up," that two strange men passed by.
"Look," said one of them, "how is this? There goes a wagon, and the driver is calling to the horse, and yet he's nowhere to be seen." "It is very strange," said the other. "We will follow the wagon and see where it belongs."
And the wagon went right through the forest, up to the place where the wood had been hewed. When Tom Thumb caught sight of his father, he cried out, "Look, father, here am I with the wagon now. Take me down." The father held the horse with his left hand, and with the right he lifted down his little son out of the horse's ear, and Tom Thumb sat down on a stump, quite happy and content. When the two strangers saw him, they were struck dumb with wonder. At last one of them, taking the other aside, said to him, "Look here, the little chap would make our fortune if we were to show him in the town for money. Suppose we buy him?" So they went up to the woodcutter and said, "Sell the little man to us. We will take care he shall come to no harm."
"No," answered the father. "He is the apple of my eye, and not for all the money in the world would I sell him."
But Tom Thumb, when he heard what was going on, climbed up by his father's coat-tails, and, perching himself on his shoulder, he whispered in his ear, "Father, you might as well let me go. I will soon come back again." Then the father gave him up to the two men for a large piece of money. They asked him where he would like to sit. "Oh, put me on the brim of your hat," said he. "There I can walk about and view the country, and be in no danger of falling off." So they did as he wished, and when Tom Thumb had taken leave of his father, they set off all together. And they traveled on until it grew dusk, and the little fellow asked to be set down a little, while for a change, and after some difficulty they consented. So the man took him down from his hat and set him in a field by the roadside, and he ran away directly, and, after creeping about among the furrows, he slipped suddenly into a mouse hole, just what he was looking for. "Good evening, my masters. You can go home without me," cried he to them, laughing. What? They ran up and felt about with their sticks in the mouse hole, but in vain. Tom Thumb crept farther and farther in, and as it was growing dark, they had to make the best of their way home, full of vexation and with empty purses. The I'm having a himbo moment. Apologies. He called out to the bad guys. I thought he was talking to the mice. So he called out to the bad guys, and the bad guys felt around for him, but they couldn't find him, and so they went away with empty purses. Okay. When Tom Thumb found they were gone, he crept out of his hiding place underground. "It is dangerous work groping about these holes in the darkness," said he. "I might easily break my neck." But by good fortune he came upon an empty snail shell. "That's all right," said he. "Now I can get safely through the night," and he settled himself down in it. Before he had time to get to sleep, he heard two men pass by, and one was saying to the other,
"How can we manage to get hold of the rich person's gold and silver?"
"I can tell you how," cried Tom Thumb.
"How is this?" said one of the thieves, quite frightened. "I hear someone speak."
So they stood still and listened, and Tom Thumb spoke again. "Take me with you. I will show you how to do it."
"Where are you, then?" asked they.
"Look about on the ground and notice where the voice comes from," answered he. At last they found him and lifted him up.
"You little elf," said they, "how can you help us?"
"Look here," answered he. "I can easily creep between the iron bars of the parson's room and hand out to you whatever you would like to have."
"Very well," said they, "we will try what you can do."
So when they came to the parsonage house, Tom Thumb crept into the room, but cried out with all his might, "Will you have all that is here?" So the thieves were terrified and said,
"Do speak more softly, lest anyone should be awakened."
Awaked. But Tom Thumb made as if he did not hear them and cried out again, "What would you like? Will you have all that is here?" So that the cook, who was sleeping in a room hard by, heard it, and raised herself in bed and listened. The thieves, however, in their fear of being discovered, had run back part of the way, but they took courage again, thinking that it was only a jest of the little fellows. So they came back and whispered to him to be serious and to hand them out something. Then Tom Thumb called out once more as loud as he could, "Oh, yes, I will give it all to you, only put out your hands." Then the listening maid heard him distinctly that time, and jumped out of bed and burst open the door. The thieves ran off as if the wild huntsmen were behind them, but the maid, as she could see nothing, went to fetch a light, and when she came back with one, Tom Thumb had taken himself off, without being seen by her, into the barn. And the maid, when she had looked in every hole and corner and found nothing, went back to bed at last, and thought that she must have been dreaming with her eyes and ears open. So Tom Thumb crept among the hay and found a comfortable nook to sleep in, where he intended to remain until it was day, and then to go home to his father and mother. But other things were to befall him. Indeed, there is nothing but trouble and worry in this world. The maid got up at dawn of day to feed the cows. The first place she went to was the barn, where she took up an armful of hay, and it happened to be the very heap in which Tom Thumb lay asleep. And he was so fast asleep that he was aware of nothing, and never waked until he was in the mouth of the cow who had taken him up with the hay. "Oh dear," cried he, "how is it that I have got into a mill?" But he soon found out where he was, and he had to be very careful not to get between the cow's teeth. And at last he had to descend into the cow's stomach. Oh gosh. "The windows were forgotten when this little room was built," said he, "and the sunshine cannot get in. There is no light to be had." His quarters were in every way unpleasant to him, and, what was the worst, new hay was constantly coming in, and the space was being filled up. At last he cried out in his extremity, as loud as he could, "No more hay for me! No more hay for me!" The maid was then milking the cow, and as she heard a voice, but could see no one, and as it was the same voice that she had heard in the night, she was so frightened that she fell off her stool and spilt the milk. Then she ran in great haste to her master, crying, "Oh, master dear, the cow spoke." "You must be crazy," answered her master, and he went himself to the cow-house to see what was the matter. No sooner had he put his foot inside the door than Tom Thumb cried out again, "No more hay for me! No more hay for me!" Then the parson himself was frightened, supposing that a bad spirit had entered into the cow, and he ordered her to be put to death. Oh no. I'm sorry, imagining a cow being possessed was kind of funny. Sorry. So she was killed, but the stomach where Tom Thumb was lying was thrown upon a dunghill. Tom Thumb had great trouble to work his way out of it, and he had just made a space big enough for his head to go through when a new misfortune happened. A hungry wolf ran up and swallowed the whole stomach at one gulp. Ew. But Tom Thumb did not lose courage. "Perhaps," thought he, "the wolf will listen to reason," and he cried out from inside of the wolf, "My dear wolf, I can tell you where to get a splendid meal." "Where is it to be had?" asked the wolf. In such and such a house, and you must creep into it through the drain, and there you will find cakes and bacon and broth, as much as you can eat." And he described to him his father's house. The wolf needed not to be told twice. He squeezed himself through the drain in the night, and feasted in the storeroom to his heart's content. When at last he was satisfied, he wanted to go away again, but he had become so big that to creep the same way back was impossible. This Tom Thumb had reckoned upon, and began to make a terrible din inside the wolf, crying and calling as loud as he could. "Will you be quiet?" said the wolf. "You will wake the folks up." "Look here," cried the little man, "you are very well satisfied, and now I will do something for my own enjoyment," and began again to make all the noise he could. At last the father and mother were awakened. This time it's awakened. At last the father and mother were awakened, and they ran to the room door and peeped through the chink. And when they saw a wolf in occupation, they ran and fetched weapons, the man an axe, and the wife a scythe. "Stay behind," said the man as they entered the room. "When I have given him a blow, and it does not seem to have killed him, then you must cut at him with your scythe." Then Tom Thumb heard his father's voice and cried, "Dear father, I am here in the wolf's inside." Then the father called out full of joy, "Thank heaven that we have found our dear child," and told his wife to keep the scythe out of the way, lest Tom Thumb should be hurt with it. Then he drew near and struck the wolf such a blow on the head that he fell down dead. And then he fetched a knife and a pair of scissors, slit up the wolf's body, and let out the little fellow. "Oh, what anxiety we have felt about you," said the father. "Yes, father, I have seen a good deal of the world, and I am very glad to breathe fresh air again." "And where have you been all this time?" asked his father. "Oh, I have been in a mouse hole and a snail's shell, in a cow's stomach and a wolf's inside. Now I think I will stay at home." "And we will not part with you for all the kingdoms of the world," cried the parents, as they kissed and hugged their dear little Tom Thumb. And they gave him something to eat and drink, and a new suit of clothes, as his old ones were soiled with travel. Travel. All right. Oh, it looks like the next story is again about Tom Thumb. So you have that to look forward to next time. Yay! Put the bookmark here. All right. Thanks again for listening, and good night.